this meeting of the Southfield Redevelopment Authority Board of Directors. The first item on the agenda are minutes, the minutes from April 8th. Oh, I'm
Cameo appearance, huh?
I am so excited to get this off of our, so for the first time since April, we have the correct group of people here to approve the minutes from April 18th.
Welcome to approve.
I think Tony should second it.
Yes.
Second.
All right, nice.
All those in favor?
Abstaining, I wasn't in.
Yeah, I'm abstaining. That was school break week, I think. We had a small group. So Kelly, Tony, Tom, Bob, Dave, yes. The rest of us abstaining. The next item on the agenda are the minutes from October 3rd, 2018.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion from the board? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstaining, that's unanimous. The next item is the applicable subdivision board Stonebridge definitive subdivision plan revision 1. I think we have some guests here tonight.
Hi, my name is Hugh Hahn. I'm a project manager with Vanessa Hannon Brusler. We're consultants to Stonebridge Homes LLC, which was the firm, the builder that purchased the lots that were subdivided last May, as the Stonebridge subdivision project. Tonight, here with me representing the builder is Tony Esposito. Co-applicant is also L-Star Ventures or L-Star Southfield, Tom Berkeley and Jerry Kavanaugh here. I don't expect much presentation from either of those groups. I've got a very short couple of slides to go through. Basically, the subdivision, 42 lots, I believe, were approved last May. The builder who purchased the lots wants to elevate the houses a little higher than was anticipated last year when we laid out the roads. In order to do that, they want to lift the roads. They'll elevate the grading up to the building and then back down into the backyard and pretty much match grade before they go off to the abutters. I've got just a few slides I wanted to show you tonight, but basically the purpose of the application and the revision is to raise the streets within the subdivisions. We're making no changes to the alignment. It's odd to sit down during a presentation. So, this is the development plan that was approved prior to the subdivision last year. As I mentioned, we're making no changes to the access, to the utilities, and the like. So that all remains the same. As I mentioned, the utility connections still remain the same as last year. We enter in off Memorial Grove, Douglas Street comes across the top, Manchester Street comes down. We had two hammerhead ends that were then connected as a comment from the fire department to connect a walking trail through here plus a fire department access road. That was approved last year. This is the layout materials plan from this year, and it's identical to last year, same number of lots and layout.
Are those the 5,000 square foot lots like the rest back here, or are these different?
These are a little bit bigger than the 5,000, yeah, 45, yes. So the 55, thank you. So in raising the road, we're connecting into Memorial Grove as we did before. We're coming up from Memorial Grove Avenue. One of the comments we received through review was to make sure we came up at the slope that's allowed by the subdivision regs. That's a 4% slope coming up. We come up at 4% in order to lift the roads 2 to 4 feet. And the contours that you see around here are the ground coming back down from those streets to the existing grade. So the subdivision plan that we're hoping to approve is going to get the utilities and the roads built. We'll be back in with Stonebridge Homes after the approval of the subdivision with a site plan review. That site plan review will include the lot grading and landscaping around the buildings, as well as the building footprints and elevations for approval. That's when we will have completed lot grading for each of these houses. Stonebridge Homes is looking at a slightly different building footprint than they've used in other facilities, so those buildings, that architecture is still under development. They're hoping to do more basements here than would have been allowed or would have been allowed practical with the other roadway alignment. The other roadway grading could have come up a couple of feet by the time you got to the garage. That, if you wanted to set a basement in that, would have been that much deeper. They wanted to raise the roads in order to get a separation from the groundwater, which we have from ground monitoring wells that were done last year in advance of the subdivision. Get the necessary separation from the finished floor to be able to put a basement in. That is the sole purpose really of raising the roads. It didn't change any of the drainage patterns. The roads still collect to the same patterns before. Stormwater management hasn't changed. The utility layout is, as I mentioned a few times, probably getting repetitive at this point, has not been changed. And then there's only a couple more technical drawings here, which are just in the subdivision plan package, showing where we've raised the elevation of the roads over what they were before. There is one slight change in the area between the backs of all of the houses that are in the interior. We've added some area drains, and in between those area drains we have the Cultec units, which is a row of chambers that collects runoff mostly from the rooftops, allows it to infiltrate. Before, we had a series of dry wells behind each of the houses. With the slight difference in what we're expecting in the grading on this interior loop, we're going to collect those, we'll do that infiltration in these new Cultec units, and then eventually that connects out to the storm drain system.
How does it impact utility corridors? Anything?
The utility corridors are in the same locations. We've left the utilities roughly at the same elevations.
That's what, okay.
The sewer elevation is the same because we had some vertical conflicts that got us low in the first place, so we're just coming up from that. The drainage system in the streets, we're keeping low, rather than raising them up with the streets. We're hoping that the foundation perimeter drains, exterior perimeter drains, that we're gonna put around some of the buildings with basements, we can connect out into the roadway storm drainage. That would give a little more protection to these basements if there were a groundwater rise that was higher than expected.
Do you contemplate basements on every one of the houses?
Probably, I don't know that all of them will actually grade out to be allowed basements.
And how deep, if you know, would you contemplate the basements being?
Just a standard, probably 7 to 8 foot clearance on the inside.
So you're 3 above grade on the road, so beyond that, you'd go maybe 2, like how do you come up with 7? Because the elevation would have to be high.
Right,
Like
so
because you're probably 2 feet to water, right?
we're over 4 feet to water. We've got good depth of water, relatively good depth of water where we are that would allow us to get spread footings in, but wouldn't allow us to go down another 8 feet for a basement elevation.
So the foundation grades can be just standard issue under this plan?
The footing would be at the bottom of the basement.
Not the
Yes.
footing, but the elevation rather than the foundation, like relative to the house. Basically what I'm getting at is you're not gonna have huge foundations above ground.
They may want to do some partial walkouts on the units to the back, not to the front. So there'll be a garage in the front typically, and a driveway coming up from the street up to that garage. That only has a limited, it's a fairly short driveway because these are small lots. So you can only get the house so much higher above the road.
Dave, you're talking about the exposure from
Yeah.
the front?
Backside exposure, what you would see from the rest of the subdivision,
It should be a standard 2 feet, so you'll have 6 feet of foundation in the ground and 3 feet of
And 2
foundation on
exposed.
top of the footing, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the fronts of the yards are gonna come up to meet the garage, which would be probably 6 inches below the first
So
floor.
2 plus 4 gives you 1 foot above the water and then 2 above? Or
Yes.
just standard, okay,
Right.
all right. Yeah, we have sumps.
They may have sumps in their basements, but I'm hoping, I would rather that we get the basements up over that seasonal high groundwater and be able to avoid that with a perimeter foundation drain.
I just think, given what's going on, like at Dorset Park, I think it's incumbent on this board to recognize that the engineering studies were wrong on that development, and that we don't want people moving into houses that we knew potentially could flood without any, without any way to mitigate it.
But Dave, let me ask, to clarify though, was the engineering wrong, or would people put basements in and they had groundwater and they signed waivers that they knew they had groundwater?
No, the former, not the latter. There were no waivers that don't have anything.
Weren't there disclosures?
I thought there were
When the Dorset
disclosures.
Park houses were sold?
Yeah, and I think, not necessarily learning from Dorset Park, but if realizing Dorset Park and the problems that the basements have had, that's another reason to wanna lift this up and get further away from that seasonal groundwater.
Yeah, and that's good.
Does Dorset Park have sump pumps?
The builder didn't volunteer it after things started flooding. They came to their senses eventually, but everybody had to fight individually for that.
I think I think the rest of the houses with basements in the development do have sump pumps.
Yeah, it wasn't part of the approved plan.
It was optional.
Oh, it was optional?
Dorset Park, Irving.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Steve.
And people always sign waivers, not realizing maybe the future condition, but then the future condition of the home's 10, 15 years out. If you have water problems, they're problem places. So your point.
I mean, I bought
your
like
point-
11 houses. I may have signed a waiver, but there was nothing about this that caught my attention. I read every word, other than there may be some standard issue waiver in there. There was nothing that said that we're on a particularly wet area.
So to your point, would you feel more comfortable if it would be required that a sump pump is inexpensive? I mean.
Well, I don't know, we can't, it's gonna be the
Yeah.
individual residential homes,
Residential
so,
homes.
yeah, so we wouldn't be able, and this is just the roadway, so when we come back with the site plan, we can discuss what the drainage systems look like on the houses.
On the houses,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not the world's leading expert on this. I just think that it's incumbent on us to recognize it.
Is there any coverage issues that we had to give on, the roadway, like the drainage, will that change any of that?
No, there are no new waiver requests.
Okay.
I think one of the previous waiver requests had to do with the pipe slope for the
Okay.
drain lines, but given that they're gonna stay fairly low, I don't know, there's still some relief required, so.
Okay.
No changes from the previous request last year.
And then, is this filling 2 to 4 feet, does this go above the natural grade?
Yeah,
So compaction tests where it's roadway, will that be required?
yes, those are required under subdivision regs and
Okay.
for the road building.
Okay, that's fine.
Any other negative effects that we should be aware of? That would obviously, and I always look at the visual, if you're raising up the houses, what are the negative site impacts on the rest of in the future, or the rest of the projects that you're working with? You can, obviously you can mitigate them with trees and buffer. Where's the backside of the road, the backside of the houses there?
You won't be able to see them over the dome or over the bubble.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah,
On the interior,
public, just the public spots.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
yeah, all the backs of the houses are facing other development as opposed to facing Memorial Grove Avenue.
And there was one lot, if I recall, that had a utility slab on it, so that'll probably be one that won't be changed. I recall it's kind of a sort of dead middle.
Yeah, that was, I believe an AUL that needs to be addressed for the construction of that lot,
Okay.
yeah. So that, raising the road in that lot will still probably require that same resolution for that, but it wouldn't aggravate it or release it,
It just was there, okay.
yeah.
Anything else from the board? Tim, any other thoughts from your review?
No, we've received all of the comment responses back from VHB, and they've been deemed adequate, and we've added a standard condition in the proposed certificate of action for a 2-week turnaround on final plans. to address the review comments, and that's sort of our standard. And everything sort of came in today to wrap that up nicely.
Make a motion, if we're all good to go, I'll make a motion to approve the conditions and revisions of the Stonebridge definitive subdivision plans.
Second. Any further discussion from the board? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? That's unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an L-STAR update, including a status of the draft supplemental environmental impact report. I know a request on the NEPA process has been added, and we have Tom and Jerry here tonight.
I think we're gonna have to go with Jerry and Tom. We're gonna have to go with Jerry and Tom on that one.
Try to follow that, that's tough. Don't even try.
How long
I
are
know,
you
I
waiting?
think you follow that.
It dawned on me in my head as I was announcing the new thing, and I was like, I should do Jerry and Tom, and I was like, no.
I need a slide of Tom and Jerry. I don't have a slide tonight. Thank you again, Madam Chair. For the record, Tom Berkey with L-STAR. Just a quick sort of summary. As you may recall, last, I think, June of 2017, we filed a notice of project change to adjust the development program, increase the residential program by 1,000, age restricted, and increase the commercial from 2 to 8 million. That was last June. And then we filed, we referred to as a mini notice of project change to essentially change the metric on the traffic to allow us to track traffic mitigation based on actual traffic versus the metric prior to that, to the 2007 FDR, was to track traffic based on what was a perceived commercial and residential build-out. So that was sort of 2017. And with the larger notice of project change, the NEPA secretary came back and said we need to file a draft supplemental EIR. As you know, the original timeline to file that was February of 2018. And for a variety of reasons, quite frankly, all of which were on the L-STAR side, that was delayed until later this year. And it's for reasons that you probably know, has been delayed even further. And at this point, it's probably 5 to 6 months from the time we re-engage our consultants. And again, you probably know, and not worth discussing tonight, there are reasons why the consultants are currently not working. As soon as they come back to the table and pick their pencils back up, again, it's about 5 to 6 months, which puts us probably into March or April of next year. So that sort of gives you a sense of the timeline. I do want to talk a little bit about some of they're NEPA but not NEPA, sort of the big three as I refer to them. We got water, wastewater, and traffic. So we did make, and we are making progress on the waterfront, both with MWRA and the cities related to the MWRA route. There's also the route south of here, so we're making progress on that. Slow but steady progress. Same with wastewater. We're talking with the town of Weymouth. The executive director and I were up at MWRA, and we're working with that to understand if there's an opportunity to pursue that, as well as an on-site wastewater treatment plant. We have the consultant under agreement, and we're making slow and steady progress in that regard. And then traffic, we're looking at both the NEPA traffic, which we know based on going from 2 to 8 million square feet, there would be a significant traffic mitigation plan. We're also looking at sort of non-traffic, NEPA traffic related issues, specifically looking at the east entrance coming off of exit 14, Route 3 through Rockland, and looking at some different alignments there to make the alignment in the passageway from Route 3 to Union Point a little bit more direct. And again, there's still some, in addition to the consultants finishing their technical components of this NEPA filing, which is a huge NEPA filing, there's some sort of outreach to state agencies that Jerry and I and others will have to do in the coming months to sort of pick things back up, because they've been sort of on the shelf for the better part of several months. That's my update. Any questions on that? Any detailed questions or general questions? I think it was easy.
That was easy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe at least stay tuned for public comment, 'cause I think this is a request by some members of the public that you did. All right, anything else on the spectrum? Perfect. The next item on the agenda is the treasurer's report. So Eric?
Good evening, if you don't mind, I just tell me I get a chance to do this. I've got new pay stubs from the new payroll company. All of you, if you could just take a look at them and look at the deductions, make sure that they're correct. And if you haven't received your income by the time Friday hits, please let me know so I can double check and find out what bank it ended up at. But I believe so far it's worked out well. It's less expensive than what I thought. Sure, payroll could not handle us, so Paychecks, their parent company, said they would take us on and honor the agreement, which was good news for us. We worked with L-Star this week and met with Jerry and Tom, and they're
So diplomatic
they're gonna assist us with gathering the information needed for the clawback calculations, and they seem to believe that they're gonna get the cooperation needed in order to get this done in short order, which is good news for us, and get us an idea of where we are with our deferred liability with the state. I'm still following up on the audit. That's rather a large number with that, so I'm waiting until I get that to calculate it out and see what the impact will be on the financial statements. We had due and had not calculated out the other post-employment benefits for some time here, and that needs to be done. I was able to ask a friend of mine, Parker Elmer, who works with Odyssey, if he could assist out and do some basic calculations for us, and he was willing to do that for this year. And I also asked him for a quote for next year in order to catch us up. It needs to be done every other year. I think we're probably talking about somewhere around like $3,500, somewhere around that range, every other year. Also, in looking at the financial statements as they're starting to come together, it's becoming very apparent that although we did put aside $400,000 in stabilization, some combination between that and our free cash will need to be kept at a certain reserve level in order to cover our bond payments. Right now, we're just dealing with the 2010A bond, but once we get into paying the Parkway bond in combination with that, we really will have to take a look at how much money we're going to need to set aside for between reserves and stabilization to make sure we have the proper cash flow for that. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rick. Any questions from the board? Next is the executive director's report, so I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. Last week I had a chance to meet with the mayor of Weymouth, Mayor Headland, and his staff, and we followed up just to sort of touch base on how things are going. But we talked a little bit more in detail about infrastructure and the existing sort of water and sewer agreement and some of the things that L-Star is considering on the water and sewer side and how it could be helpful there, especially as it relates to potentially bonding for some of that or making an application to Clean Water Trust. So they were intrigued by some of that, and so they've agreed to some follow-up meetings, potentially directly with the MWRA around some of the sewer issues, the constraints. So that went pretty well. We also met last week with Rockland. Jim and I went over. We met with Tom was nice enough to sort of bring us over and sit us down with their acting town administrator, chair of the board, and their member of the DPW, and we got to talk about infrastructure there too, and it was a really good conversation. We talked about the East Entry Exit 14 project and the ability that we might have to find some of that design money, get it designed to the extent that we could put on a transportation improvement program for Plymouth County. So that seems to be moving along, and everybody sort of wants to do that. We also sort of touched base on Rockland and in some cases Rockland Abington's existing capacity for wastewater and water, and how we might be able to be helpful on some of those issues too, as it relates to funding. We've continued to meet with L-Star to talk about infrastructure, and we're really making some progress, I think, on the water side. So hopefully we'll have something more detailed to talk about, but I think it's all good news and heading in the right direction, and there are a lot of real options that we could see executed sooner rather than later, I think. And then obviously we talked about the exit 14 and transportation improvements with them also. So it's a real nice, been a real good partnership with LSTAR over the last couple of months. And I think together we're going to be able to do a lot more than they've been able to do on their own in the past. So that's good, that's promising. And you know, we talked today even about the MEPA process, how we might be able to play a little bit of a bigger role there, and sort of making sure that everything stays on track, and maybe helping them with some of the outreach to the state agencies and making some of those connections and reconnections that they need to make. And then today I had lunch with Peter Foreman at the South Shore Chamber of Commerce. We had a great conversation about South Shore business in general, how the Union Point project impacts positively more than just the 3 component towns. And we talked about infrastructure primarily, because that's the biggest way that it can contribute. So it is, we seem to have a natural focus on the infrastructure, but I think if you read the 2014 legislation, I think that's where we really play a primary role. And I'm convinced that once we get the right answer to permanent water, permanent wastewater, and some of these transportation site improvements, that this project will really start to pick up some steam. So we had a good conversation over there. And the South Shore Chamber has a South Shore Economic Development Corporation. LSTAR's had a seat on that and spoke with them in the past. And so Peter asked me if I would be interested in sitting on that. They might have a seat open in January. I told them I would discuss it with the board, but I think that would be a good way for us to have a presence.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Absolutely. And good opportunity to get more state and federal funding. It's a direct line to that.
Right.
And if your project's being discussed regularly there, you, the executive director, should be there.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of, you know, getting out into each of the component communities, but the communities beyond that, to sort of talk about this project and the value it has to the greater community and the region at large, is something that isn't really that difficult to do. We need to spend some more time doing that, and I think it'll pay big benefits in the short term. Also, last week we I had a conversation about down Pierce Atwood, which is a law firm, and Gareth Orsbond, who's an attorney there who I worked with at the commission for 10 years. He's got some extraordinarily relevant experience, and so we talked through legislation, some of the reg reform, or the regulation redos that we have to do that are coming up, and some of the other agreements that are out there. And we're probably going to bring Pierce Atwood on to replace some of the existing counsel that we've had to date. You know, organizations change, law firms change, you know, our needs become a little bit different, and they might move in one direction. So I think that Pierce Atwood and Gareth would be a good addition. Also, last Friday, we heard from the Coast Guard that they have agreed officially to a public-to-public transfer of the 50-acre parcel behind us. So we are now in discussion with them about a scope of work for the appraisal. So we will do an appraisal, Coast Guard will do an appraisal. If we can agree on the scope up front, the numbers should be relatively close. And then once we have the appraisal price, we can talk about how we're going to make that purchase, how it's going to fit into the overall structure. And it really does seem to be a missing piece on the residential side that I think makes the overall project more attractive than it already is. So it was a busy week with a lot of that. And Eric and Jim have been working closely with the auditors to finish that up in a timely way so that we won't miss that date that is set for us there. They've also been working with RKG on the economic analysis that will be incorporated into the redevelopment plan. We also have some work, a product that we got back today from the GIS person that we contracted with, which is really pretty cool. So she's got a story map that is put together that will show you sort of an overview of the project, little narrative, master plan, and some interactive maps so you can turn layers on and off. And I think it really, we can make that public facing on the website ultimately, and allow people to sort of deconstruct a very complicated project and answer in a self-directed way some of the questions, basic questions a lot of people And we'll also be able to add to it and add layers and parcel-specific information and use it to do sort of analysis and prospective analysis of proposed development in the future. So that was exciting to me anyway. And then the 2010 A bond, Eric's been doing a lot of work on the reporting requirements for that. And I think pretty soon it'll probably be time to think about whether refinancing that at this point makes sense and would save us some money annually. So it's been a busy couple of weeks, but I really think that we're gaining some steam, moving in the right direction. And that's it.
And are we working on the follow-up questions from the state auditors?
Already resubmitted those.
Okay, perfect.
I gave most of the points at the last one, just kind of polished it up, ran it before the call and
Great,
sent it
just
off
making
to
sure
them.
that.
I haven't heard anything back from them yet, so.
Yeah, they called me to talk about that in general. But it was more of, this is really what it is, don't be nervous. But we had already sort of responded and had it back in, and it's a real positive report, so make that copy of that available to board
Yeah,
members.
it would be great if we could see the final product. Thank you.
I appreciate you going out and talking to all sides involved, and obviously working with the LSTAR before. LSTAR was in their silo, we were in ours, a little tension back and forth, and I would like that to continue, and I'd like to make that a permanent part of your report of your interaction with them on a regular basis. So now that we, as the board, will see that, so that we don't run into some of the issues that we had before.
Yeah, no, I think it's the most important part of the job.
Yep.
And I really do feel that you've got the right people in the right places right now for this to start gaining some steam.
Madam Chair, if I could just expand a little bit on the meeting we had in Rockland, the Paul reports. I saw Paul, really at work and his global approach to this project and what he could do to bring resources, not just to Southfield, the Union Point, but to these surrounding communities that do have infrastructure needs, like the transportation, water, and sewer. So it was a great meeting. The group that was in there was very motivated. Kelly and I have spoken with Marcy Birmingham, and she's very enthusiastic about the energy that Paul brought and how we can benefit Rockland. So truly appreciated and great work there. Thank you, Paul.
And last, sorry, with the Economic Development Committee, with the Chamber of Commerce, I've spoken to many of the members there. They all are willing to give you advice. Of course, most of them give you on advice you didn't ask for, unsolicited advice. But it's open, so please utilize that, because we all want to see this project develop. And it's a constant chatter. It's good that you finally made that connection with Peter, and just take advantage of the opportunity.
Just one question, do we have any update from either on ProDrive?
I'm happy to give a quick update. We have finalized the lease with ProDrive. We are waiting for the contractor to give us final pricing, and we have every expectation that we'll have a groundbreaking before mid-December.
There are no topics that weren't reasonably anticipated in advance of the meeting. I will now take public comments on topics discussed in tonight's meeting. Yes, Mr. Shea.
Joseph Shea, 3 Wyman Road, Abington, member of the Abington member of the advisory board. 3 things. One, on the new development. One issue that came up last spring, I think it was, when there was a fire down near the railroad station. From my understanding, what the fire chief told me, there was not adequate water pressure available to deal with the fire, which delayed and resulted in problems. I have 3 concerns in that. One is for the safety of the people in those properties and properties. The second is for the safety of the firefighters. And the third is if the firefighters are delayed, if we put out the fire, as they were in that case, it strips fire coverage from the other 3 towns. We're talking about a new development. How are we making out on resolving that issue?
On the new houses, on the...
Especially for the new ones, but any houses. I'm making sure that adequate water pressure available to deal with the fire.
Madam Chair, I did some had some discussions with Jim Young, and wasn't it that you had a consultant come out and inspect the water gates, found some water gates that weren't open completely, some hydrants that weren't open completely, and they were able to go through and check the water system, and they did find some issues with hydrants, so that was a internal system problem that seemed to be corrected.
That was a contributor, I believe, to some of the flow issues at the time.
Or was it the only factor?
I'm
I
not
just,
aware.
Paul remembers, he was at the Abbey Select Meeting, I raised that question at that point. And to me, it's gotta be a concern.
I believe, I mean, Tom is here, you can speak to
Yeah,
the looping effort as well.
I think really the issue is the connection of the existing water connecting at Trotter, which the contractor started and stopped work probably 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. We hope to get that resolved in the next 30 days or so. That'll solve the pressure and capacity issue. That's the main issue, right?
That's the opening of Trotter that you expected to be talked about.
Yeah, it's about 200 feet of a connection that started. As you can tell, there's a plate over the road. The contractor hopefully will be back on site in the next 30 days to finish that.
The second concern I have is, at the last meeting, there was concern, at least I raised concerns about what happened in the newspaper with L-Star. And I think the impression I got was L-Star would begin to do an update over what the status was tonight. Did we get an update on the MEPA plan, but not an update on overall where they are? And the thing I do remember is the mayor's letter, setting a one-month ultimatum, was dated September 21st. 21st is within a week.
Yep, so I don't want to speak for L-Star, but I think that they're continuing to pursue options to meet the mayor's requests and are in continued dialogue, both internally and with other involved parties, but I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's a public update today, but we're hopeful that by our next meeting there will be a more robust update.
Yes, I think I can assure you that at your next meeting, I think that's 3 weeks from tonight, there will be a public update, and we speak with the mayor and the mayor's office on a regular basis to make certain that we keep them up to date also.
Given the discussion of the problem, the work of the contractors on the water, the Strata Road being stopped, and the problems on the consultants for the MEPA report being discontinued, I mean, that's at least to me is a concern.
Yeah, it is the board's #1 concern right now as well, and we're in, continued discussions, as I mentioned, with All-Star. It's very frustrating to have this going on right now, and I think that all the parties involved are very frustrated. Unfortunately, the direction that this all went, there are multiple pending lawsuits at this point that have various impact, and we, respect and understand that L-Star may not be in a position to discuss things publicly at this point in time, and understand that probably to resolve these outstanding issues, they need to handle a number of issues with their own attorneys without sharing it in public meeting at this point. As Jerry said, they've told us that they hope to have an update within the next couple of weeks, potentially sooner, but certainly in time for some news to be shared at our November 7th meeting.
The third item on the MEPA review, will that information be presented, as it goes along, be presented to the 3 towns? I assume it might be in the case of...
It's the same, this is the same one that was
Oh, yeah.
given to everyone. I mean, this is
Yes.
this was presented to the towns, it's just been sitting for a really long time. I assume if there's any significant updates in the
That's what-
process,
yeah.
that will be
Yes.
presented to the towns as well.
Absolutely.
But it's still that same filing that we got a copy of.
Right, but I'm looking at it as the findings are developed, and as the document is developed, reply, you present that information.
It's required.
Yeah, I think, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, Ms. Parsons?
I would, you mentioned something going on the tips. Are you talking about Reservoir Park Drive and Hingham Street from Route 3?
There's no specific plan yet, so.
So it's putting things on the tips in general?
Well, the tip process in Massachusetts, that's where the federal money comes through the state.
Right.
That's where all the big money for transportation projects is. But the state doesn't fund design. right? So that's a way they sort of keep control over how many projects get to the tip. So the basic discussion that we're having right now is if there's a general interest in improving that access, is there a way that we could sort of supplement the design money for the town of Rockland, so that we could get to a level of design that it would be tip eligible?
But it wouldn't be the town of Rockland that's going to do those improvements because they are in the current MEPA certificate for the master developer to pay for those improvements.
Yeah.
And they haven't been done in 11 years.
I mean, that's part of the discussion that we're pursuing now, is how can we make the infrastructure improvements with the assets that we have available through the 2014 legislation. So I think it's good that all parties are talking right now, and when we have something a little bit more specific, we'll share that. And it should be consistent, I think, with the legislative direction from 2014.
And the other questions I have, which Elstar's aware of, is the stormwater issues, because the water, it's not going to Weymouth, it's coming through Rockland and through Rockland neighborhoods. So it has to be, it's no room for error. Right. And with a sewer treatment plant, and that was an issue with that, is the wastewater, there's going to be discharge, regardless of what you say you're going to use it for. And we really need to know where that discharge is going to go to, which is more than likely French's Stream on the west side.
Yeah, we've had discussions. I think stormwater is one of the real opportunities on site to do things that are creative and sort of state-of-the-art. So I hope to see that. It's part of the overall comprehensive infrastructure plan that we've discussed with Elstar. It's just, it's the water and the wastewater and some of the transportation needs are a little bit ahead of it now, but I hope that we can at least start to sketch it out and discuss that as part of a comprehensive infrastructure plan that should be included in the redevelopment plan update.
And water and sewer itself, it's still kind of vague where you're saying that there may be things that can help out the town of Rockland.
Yeah.
But it's a very vague statement. They are supposed to go to the MWRA, and it would be a lot better if sewer went to the MWRA.
It is a vague statement because it's an update, because it was one conversation so far. So I don't want to put too many specifics on one conversation. But I think there are opportunities for the project, given the way the project was restructured by the 2014 legislation, with the municipalities really ultimately being responsible for a lot of the infrastructure. I think extending town infrastructure into the site at certain points might be a less costly and more viable option. And so we might be able to partner with the towns if it's the right economy of scale, so that the towns get more capacity and the Union Point site gets the capacity that it needs. So that's our goal in these discussions. And so as they develop and we have more specifics, we hope we can meet our goal.
But the towns aren't financially responsible for water and sewer, so it almost sounds like you're saying that the towns are going to be responsible for water and sewer.
That's why she's saying it's a benefit.
Actually, So what we're trying to do, I mean, to be really basic, I think, is that the towns have certain needs on the infrastructure side for water and sewer, and we have certain needs at the site. If together it's less expensive to address those needs, that's probably what we should take a look at doing.
And you've talked to the MWRA about this? Because any other towns would still have to pay an entrance fee, regardless.
We have talked to the MWRA.
And I've heard the answer has been no.
No. This has actually never been no in any meeting I've had with the MWRA.
But I have heard it's been no.
Yeah.
Great.
But we'll find out.
This isn't very productive at this point. I mean, Paul's giving an update. I don't know, Paul's giving firsthand information. We're gonna move on. Any other comment? Yep, Mr. Longo.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for an update on the MEPA process. I know we all would like to see it go quicker than it is, but we understand the situation. The other thing I just want to ask is an update on the floodplain map. So as we all know, because this was a military facility, there are no flood maps in the former Naval Air Station site here. And, we had discussion. I just don't know where you are on that. And I just, at a comment is, Town of Weymouth is doing its update to its 7-year open space and recreation plan, and we are going to be incorporating the Weymouth portion of Union Point in our update to the open space plan. So we need to get a little bit of an understanding where on the Weymouth side, where the master planning of the open space and recreation plan is, because we want to make sure that you are incorporated into that plan, and that plan will enable the town to apply for grants with federal recreation funds, land, water, and also with state money as well. So it's kind of an important item. That plan it has to be submitted by January 2020. That's when our existing plan expires. So any information you guys can give me relative to that, and so we can have discussion about that. And we will be outreaching to the Weymouth residents of Union Point for their input on the open space plan as well. So I just want to give you that.
Bob, would Rockland and Abington be in the same boat of?
I don't know if Rockland and Abington have open space plans.
We do.
Or not. They have a
I was
plan?
going to talk to you afterwards, we do.
Yeah.
I believe Abington's master plan is being updated.
This
So maybe everybody would benefit from that.
And so is Rob.
This is
Okay,
Yeah, yeah. So the way the legislation is, you know, kind of like Weymouth is responsible for their part of it, and Rockland would kind of like be under their open space plan, and Abington would be as well. But since we want to get our plan in so we don't, it doesn't expire, and so I just wanted to just give everyone a heads up on that. But maybe just on the FEMA thing.
Yeah, so, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Long, we met a few weeks ago. I'll work backwards on the sort of the open space master plans I mentioned. Frankly, I'm gonna have to get up to speed, probably gonna need a little bit of Jim's help on the overall open space and trail master plan, because we have to do that for a variety of reasons, and I mentioned it to Mr. Luongo that it probably makes sense to have a meeting with either Bob and Jim and maybe Paul to go through, because quite frankly, I have not been involved. We've had some changes internally. The individual that was sort of spearheading that is no longer with LSTAR. So I need to get up to speed on that, but I think Mr. Long would agree that's probably the best way to do it. And with respect to FEMA, we have a consultant, and as reasons that I talked about earlier, they're not able to start the work on FEMA. It took us a while to get a few consultants and a few proposals, but we have a consultant ready to go. It's probably, that process takes a little bit of time, but it's probably 3 to 4 months until we get a draft back from them. So I wouldn't imagine that we'd see anything until either the end of this year or beginning of next year. But I'll keep Mr. Long posted on that as soon as, probably would make sense to have a kickoff meeting as soon as we get that consultant sort of under agreement.
Great, well, it would be great if the three of you could work offline and address this issue directly amongst yourselves and update us. Thank you. Anything else? Great. Seeing no further comments, our next meeting is on November 7th, 2018.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.